Amnesty International says there have been serious violations of international law in Cabo, Delgado in Mozambique. Hundreds of civilians have been killed by government security forces and the armed group Al-Shabaab. Believes a South African private security company has been sending mercenaries into the region. Over 500,000 people have already been displaced. Let's find out more from Amnesty International's David Matsinhe. David, a very good morning to you. Very disturbing findings. We've been hearing about this, but the extent of it is quite extraordinary. Tell us more about what you've been hearing about government atrocities and the South African Dyke Advisory Company.
Absolutely. There are three players in Cabo Delgado involved in a three-way violence and violation of human rights and war crimes. On the one hand, you have the armed group fighters who are shooting and killing civilians, burning their homes, looting their food and property. And they are also abducting women and children and subjecting them to sexual and physical and emotional violence, forced marriages. And on the government side, we have security forces subjecting detainees to torture, forced disappearance, extrajudicial killings, including the people they suspect of providing aid and comfort, to the insurgent group. And we also have the South African military company that was contracted by the Mozambican government to provide military assistance, the Dyke Advisory Group, who have been using helicopters to engage in indiscriminate shooting with machine guns from the helicopters and throwing hand grenades to crowds of civilians without distinguishing between civilian and military targets. We've seen hospitals and schools shot at and thrown grenades at, and this has resulted in the killings of civilians in this way. So this is what we have observed, and this is what the report is all about.
Why do you think that the military needs to work with this company? Is it an admission that they are not being able to cope themselves, or is it a way to step back from some of the atrocities that are being committed?
What we have seen is that the Mozambican security forces have not been able to control the actions of the insurgents in northern Mozambique, and so they have resorted in contracting private military companies, such as this one. There was a Russian one a few years ago, which, did not produce any results. And now we have, the South African military company involved. Now, our contention is that whoever is involved in the Cabo Delgado in this conflict must observe international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and in the case of this military company in South Africa, must abide by the South African legislation. This company should have obtained permission from the South African government to provide military assistance in Mozambique. Did they get it? Is the South African government willing to provide publicly such information? Now, we are calling for an investigation of this company by the South African government to ensure that they live by, the international human rights standards, and to ensure that they abide by the South African legislation.
All right. And what sort of response have you had from Dyke Advisory, the government as well? And can you give us a sense of numbers? How many are involved from the South African point of view? And are we seeing growing insurgency in Mozambique? What sort of numbers are we talking about there?
Well, the insurgency in Mozambique continues. People are being killed. We have more than 600,000, of internally displaced people. That's more than half of the population of Cabo Delgado that are, living without food, without water. They are suffering, living in deplorable economic and social conditions. And we are calling on the South African government to ensure that this company lives by the human rights standards, and the Mozambican government to open up the space so that aid groups can provide food aid and education and housing that are desperately needed in that area.
David, very good to talk to you from Amnesty International. Thank you for keeping your eye on this situation. It is extremely worrying.